A landmark project is helping to uncover Australia's dark past. Historians have mapped 250 massacres of Indigenous tribes across the country. They occurred during frontier times. Hundreds of Australians contacted the researchers with new information and leads on long-forgotten sites. Here's Indigenous Affairs correspondent Bridget Brennan.
This is a modest monument to a significant moment in time.
It's a dark chapter in the history of what became and what happened to the Turrbal people.
On Sydney's outskirts at Appin, 14 Aboriginal people were murdered by soldiers in 1816. Elder Ivan Wellington helped establish this plaque, one of few markers of the conflict that followed colonisation.
This happened first, and it should never be forgotten.
A groundbreaking project mapping massacre sites of Indigenous people is now one of the most detailed resources available.
I think we've got enough evidence there now that nobody can deny that there were widespread massacres across the Australian frontier for more than 150 years.
There's extensive research on conflict sites in Tasmania, known as the island's Black War. Further north, researchers have now mapped massacre sites in far western New South Wales and Queensland. Work has begun to mark sites in the Northern Territory and South Australia. But the map is still missing the multiple massacres of Western Australia's Aboriginal population. It's taken years of painstaking research to get to this point, to mark 250 massacres across Australia. But researchers estimate they're only halfway there.
We think we're going to estimate that there were at least 500 sites.
It's 1854.
First Nations people are now grappling with the best way to remember these deaths.
That kind of space to commemorate and to kind of memorialise is definitely missing.
Wiradjuri artist Brooke Andrew has visited massacre sites overseas and says Australia has much to learn.
People can reconcile with their own trauma and their own pasts, and then therefore how they can kind of educate the kind of broader community.
This is one memorial which has helped a community face up to its past. Bridget Brennan, ABC News.
Prosperity of the colony. So I guess this is basically saying that he's put Cox in charge of basically
building that road.
Yeah. The first main road.
Road over the mountains, yeah.
The Blue Mountains.
The Blue Mountains.
Wow.
Yeah. Uncharted territory. It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Why was Macquarie so determined to get this road commissioned and built?
At this time, in 1814, New South Wales was in the grip of a drought, and they were running out of water, they were running out of crops, and they needed to find somewhere else on site, or in the country, where they could grow food rather than having to ship it in from overseas. And obviously he couldn't keep doing that all the time. It's much more sensible to have the food here, so he needed to find that route across the mountains to that wonderful land. That
I'd be interested to know if the road's still there with modern...
Well, I'm not actually sure if the road's still there or not, so...
Maybe I need to go and have a look.
Maybe you do.
In 1814, what we know today as Australia consisted of just the small colony around Sydney called New South Wales. The rest of the continent was sparsely inhabited by Indigenous Aborigines, but remained unexplored and uncolonised by Europeans. The existing colony was hemmed in by a huge mountain range, the narrowest point of which was the Blue Mountains. Up to now, they had only been crossed by surveyors on foot. On the other side, they discovered vast plains of fertile land and rivers of fresh water, which were vital if the colony were to expand and survive. Cox's proposed 101-mile road was seen as the lifeline that would save New South Wales. Jason wants to see for himself the scale of the problem that confronted William Cox. So he's headed towards the mountain range. Cox handpicked a team of convict labourers. Working before the invention of dynamite, armed only with pickaxes, shovels and gunpowder, they would be attempting to take on dense forest and cliff faces made of sandstone and granite.
Wow. That is insane. To attempt to actually build a road across this landscape is absolutely awesome. Takes your breath away. Absolutely takes your breath away. To think Cox even thought he could take on such a task to build a road to what is essentially a promised land on the other side without knowing exactly where you were heading. I mean, unbelievable. The drama of just looking at this is bottom line man against nature.
Governments and leaders alone cannot make reconciliation happen simply through legislation, decrees, declarations or rhetoric. True reconciliation must come from the hearts and minds of the Australian people, in the respect they have for differences, in the attitudes they encourage in their children, and in their recognition of the common destiny we share together as Australians. In facing the realities of the past, however, we must not join those who would portray Australia's history since 1788 as little more than a disgraceful record of imperialism, exploitation and racism.
His past is a past full of good people, and then there are the bad historians in the present who are somehow wanting to attack that idealised past.
Such a portrayal is a gross distortion, and it deliberately neglects the overall story of great Australian achievement that is there in our history to be told, and such an approach will be repudiated by the overwhelming majority of Australians who are proud of what this country has achieved, although inevitably acknowledging the blemishes in its past history.
He was forced to make some concession that Aboriginal people had been murdered and dispossessed. So he makes the concession, and in making the concession he chooses this word blemish.
The blemishes in its past history.
This is a blemish on our past. So it's this minimising of something which is actually about the very structural foundations of the Australian economy, which is based on the dispossession of land, and that's more than a blemish.
We need to acknowledge openly that the treatment accorded to many Indigenous Australians over a significant period of European settlement represents the most blemished chapter in our history.
So here is a Prime Minister denying that race relations really are at the heart of some of Australia's most intractable problems. So he's denying it at the same time as he's using a word that draws attention to skin colour. Blemishes are on skins, they're on the surface, but blemishes are also on reputations. And Australia's reputation is being blemished in a way that it's very hard for us to respond to. It's being blemished by the fact that there were actually people here with the wrong skin colour when we got here.
The blemishes in its past history.
It seemed to me that in this choice of the word blemish, we were seeing the return of the repressed in Howard's public discourse, that he was, by using that word, in fact admitting the very thing he was attempting to deny.
And it's only when we listen that we can hear what might be beyond the words.